I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm joined by Oscar-winning composer Stephen Price, whose new film, Over the Moon, is currently streaming on Netflix. Thanks for joining us, Stephen. The film's music has a lot of Chinese influence to it. Did you have to do any research into the music of that country before starting to compose the score?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, the first conversations I had with the filmmakers was that, we really wanted the film to feel like China ran through every frame of the film, but didn't want to do it in a way that felt like that cliche of film music, where it's a pretty traditional Western orchestra with a solo instrument on top. And there you go, there's your Chinese influence. So I kind of tried to work out ways that I could thread it through in a way that felt more kind of a texture. So I recorded a lot of instruments early on, like the guts and this amazing kind of Chinese harp, and who's this sort of violin, kind of Chinese violin type thing, and recorded a lot of just very simple things early on, and then stretched them and manipulated them, and kind of built these textures before I really started writing the main body of the score. So I kind of started writing with this Chinese sort of sound around me, and that kind of influenced how the writing was. So hopefully we found a way to sort of honor the Chinese story that we were telling without it feeling like we were kind of, imposing our normal kind of Western orchestra thing on it.
What was the name of that instrument that you said the Chinese harp instrument?
The gutsun, it's an amazing sort of plucked sound. It's kind of just somehow just sounds timeless and beautiful. And we did a bit of that. And then the erhu, which is this single string violin, which I'd never worked with before. And we had a player in London, and it was just amazing. How she does it, I don't know, but she just manages to make one string sound like, the biggest sound in the world.
Were there any other instruments or just aspects of the Chinese music that you were researching that you found particularly ear catching?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the actual melodic sort of scales that are used. It's very pentatonic kind of sounding thing. So 5 notes in the scale, and a lot of the melody came from that. And then you'd find ways as you made one melody reach another, it would kind of sort of start to help you tell the stories and feel hopefully very distinctive to the characters. So there's a bit of that came into it, and through the research and listening to a lot of Chinese music, it became sort of, you started to think in those terms. So that was very influential. And yeah, lots of woodwind and things like that. That just kind of often just is very, very subtly used around the edges of arrangements. That seemed to play a part in this one.
Was composing the score so what's really fun about this movie is it is an actual musical. There are musical numbers throughout it. Was composing the score to a musical something you had always wanted to do?
Yeah, and it's been something I've been increasingly looking to do for the last few years. My kids, I have young daughters who are obsessed with all things musical theatre, and I love all that sort of stuff, and we end up listening to an awful lot of it together. So it's always been an ambition, and when this one came up, the fact it was a musical was just like this gift. And the songs were already in place by the time I came on board, and they were working great, but they were very diverse. There was an awful lot of different musical styles that they were going through. And so part of my job became sort of weaving through those songs and trying to make it feel like this seamless journey where all those styles feel very natural as they come up. And sometimes, I would quote musical phrases from the songs. Sometimes I would kind of act as a weaving kind of thing. But my main job was always to just follow Fei Fei on her journey through all of these songs. So yeah, it was fun to work on a musical and try and make it feel like one voice, that it was all coming from the same story. Yeah, so I enjoyed that.
That actually is something I was curious. I was going to ask about in terms of, so the songs were already completed by the time that you had come on board, correct?
Yeah, they were demoed, so they existed, and there were vocal performances by the lead actors. So when I came on, they were kind of computer demos with the voices on, and basically through the process, we ended up recording the orchestra and the instrumental tracks for those when we did my main score sessions in July, actually, of last year.
And so had you ever done anything like that where there was like this other like pre-existing kind of music that was for a project that you had to connect through and sort of do that, as you described, like weaving? Had you ever done anything like that before in scoring?
Yeah, and in a few different sort of projects. I mean, my sort of big break really in this world of composing was working for Edgar Wright. An early film I did for him was The World's End, which was the last film in his kind of cornetto trilogy, we called it. And there's always a lot of brilliantly chosen source music in his films. There's a lot of needle drop songs, all very intrinsic to the plot. And gradually, as we've worked together on a number of films over the years, we've got kind of more experimental with the way we do that. You know, Baby Driver is the one that probably had the most overlap to this point of songs being there, doing their role, but the score kind of embellishing that song and kind of layering it and making it do a different role and really sort of enabling the song to kind of act as score does, you know, and to really be able to turn corners and to add detail to scenes. We've just finished another film which will be out next year called Last Night in Soho, where we've taken some of those techniques way further, and there's a lot more score in that film as well. So I got to kind of launch off in different directions. But that idea of weaving through songs has been something that's been in a lot of work. So I kind of felt when Over the Moon came up that this was great, you know, because it was, you could try some of those techniques, but with original songs and having a bit more control over, you know, how you could use things thematically and that kind of stuff.
Were there any? Oftentimes with scores, you could sometimes find that there will be instruments that are specific instruments that are used to lean into that are used to lean into certain characters or themes of the film. Were there any specific instruments that you found yourself using in order to underscore those kinds of elements for Over the Moon?
Yeah, most of it was kind of the way you'd use the instruments. I mean, there are instruments which are really associated with characters. The erhu, that very sort of tragic sounding Chinese violin, that's very associated with the moon goddess in the film, because it does sound and is traditionally used in China for sadness. You know, that's one of its roles within the culture, and her whole being is built on this sadness of how she's got trapped on the moon, and everything you see in Lunaria, this sort of world she's created, is born of her sadness. It's literally born of her tears. So whenever you saw her, it felt right to have that. But a lot of the things that are associated with characters in this film tended to be motifs, sort of little thematic things. You know, Fei Fei herself has got a little motif which you hear from the very first moments you see her, which then gradually develops through the film, and in the end meets what is the big Lunaria theme, and the two of them come together as the two of them solve their problems. You know, it's sort of Fei Fei learns to move on in her life, and Lunaria kind of solves a lot of its problems as part of the journey as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there are various sort of techniques really to try and make these characters all feel like they had a life.
You mentioned your film, the film Baby Driver, that you did the score to. Your work with Edgar Wright, which I love that you worked on the Cornetto trilogy, even if Hot Fuzz is the superior one of the three. But
I'm a big Shaun of the Dead fan, so between us, there's all three of them.
Oh, we're just gonna go at it now. But I've always wondered, like, what is, and maybe you could just go into specifically like with Baby Driver, because it was using pre-existing songs, as and it was so, and it sometimes feels like, you know, the score could get lost in there because the pre-existing music, like especially like that opening credits sequence, is so prominent. And I'm just curious, how do you go about trying to weave that, thread that needle with music that's already existing and kind of spans a musical gambit also?
I think you basically just do everything you possibly can to honor the story being told, and someone like Edgar, he's chosen those tracks incredibly precisely. You know, there's no process in his films where we're just throwing a few things at it and seeing what sticks. You know, these things were in the script. And in fact, the way I met Edgar was back in 2007 when we first spoke about the script of Baby Driver, and we ended up finishing the film in 2017. So that was a 10-year process of continually going back to that script and working out, you know, is this song going to work better for this? And so everything, we kind of knew what each song needed to accomplish. And sometimes songs can't do that because they're not designed to do what a score would do. They can't change gear in the same way. But if you add a layer of orchestra to that, then all of a sudden you can kind of stretch it somewhere else. Maybe you can manipulate the song. And, you know, there was a moment in one of the chases in Baby Driver where we literally took the track and kind of, we slowed it down and we morphed it, and it became this kind of trippy thing where the orchestra could join in and take it off on this different journey. it kind of becomes this really interesting way of it's a real blend of different disciplines kind of come together, and the sound department's very involved as well. You know, every sound effect in Baby Driver was in tune with the music and was in time with the music, so we were kind of constantly talking to each other about how best to do that, and you know, interesting ideas of, you know, when the car drives by, you know, and there's the siren or whatever could be in pitch with the track, you know, every single thing, and it gradually becomes more than the sum of its parts. So it's often a case of just the process itself is this iterative process where you try something and that suggests the next idea and that suggests the next idea. And before you know it, if you go back to just the song on its own, it's kind of not playing the game dramatically for you. But if you add all these other elements, all of a sudden it's become this sequence and it's become the thing that really pulls you through and has a momentum to it. So that's, you know, a lot of the fascination with that sort of work for me is just how can we turn this into something that really works dramatically well rather than just being a needle drop.
So you mentioned that you first met Edgar Wright in 2007, right?
Yeah.
And he did he meet with you specifically to talk about this idea that he had that became Baby Driver?
Yeah, we were introduced. I just finished a film called The Boat That Rocked over here. I think it was called Pirate Radio in America, which is a Richard Curtis film with loads and loads of 60s tracks. It was all set on the pirate radio ships of the 60s. And I'd basically been the music person on that. So I'd kind of done a similar job in lots of ways, and that everything needed to weave into everything else. There were various bits where, you know, the song couldn't quite accomplish what we needed to do dramatically. So I would do a bit of strings or do a little bit of, you know, whatever it was needed. And so off the back of that, I got introduced to Edgar, who had this idea of a film that was literally all about a character's relationship to music. And I think the first page of the script was like, you know, this film is everything you see in here in this film is all going to be based on the music. And so yeah, he was working it out and needing a way to kind of to talk about it initially, you know. So a lot of what I was doing was breaking down songs with him, and we'd kind of work out, you know, the beginning bit of this song, you know, is at this tempo, we want the character to walk across the road. Would that work with windscreen wipers? Would that work with the footfall? You know, it's all this kind of technical stuff which was all about making these things come together.
So I do also want to ask, we are an awards website, and you had a pretty memorable awards night back in 2014 at the 86th Oscars when you won the Oscar for Best Original Score for Gravity. What was your experience like? What was that night like for you?
I mean, it was wonderfully surreal, basically. I mean, it's a funny thing, the whole award season thing. I mean, it's one of those things when you've done it and you've gone through it and you kind of wish now that you'd looked up a little bit more, because at the time you're so frantic and kind of a little bit nervous because you've not been in that world before. But it was great, you know. And one thing about Gravity was that that film obviously did very well in lots of different departments, and we'd all been on the film for a long time together. So we all went through that experience together. So it was a night like the Oscars, you were there with your mates, really. And we'd all flown over from England, and we were having this amazing time. And, you know, there were an awful lot of laughs and lovely times with people that you've grown really close to. So my main memory of it is that, really, and just the crazy surreal thing of standing there on a stage kind of with a counter in the distance as your speech time went down, and it just being like, God, this is really, really odd. But, you know, it was an amazing sort of time, and I'm just really proud of that film. So I think that's always something I can kind of cling on to, is it happened for a film and a score that I'm really, really proud of. So, you know, it was a lovely time.
One other thing that I thought was, I recently rewatched the presentation of when he won. It was presented by Jamie Foxx and Jessica Biel. Jamie Foxx was doing that thing where he was humming the Chariots of Fire theme in the presentation. But when they announced your name, what was interesting is that you were in that little, I guess, like seating area with several of the other nominees. You were sitting next to John Williams, of all people. They call your name and he turns to you and shakes your hand. I mean, that had to automatically just take that night to another level. What was that like, sitting next to John Williams?
And just as you say that I get this, that was probably the most memorable thing, is that, and it wasn't just that night and that moment, it was the whole build up through that. You know, behind the scenes, there was a concert a couple of days before where all the nominees for songs and scores had come together, and we'd all performed elements of our scores. And John Williams had come to my rehearsal for that. as a supportive gesture to the new boy who, you know, had never been doing this before. You know, there's a meal, you know, all the nominees come together for a meal. And there were various moments in that. And I'm sitting in this room, you know, with John Williams and Randy Newman was there, Tom Newman was there, Alexander Desplat was there. These, you know, huge heroes of yours, and, you know, brilliant people at the job. And, you know, and every now and then John Williams would turn around and check I was doing okay. And he was so brilliantly supportive. So beyond all of the amazing, wonderful music that will live forever that he's done, my main memory of him was just what a wonderful, thoughtful human he was. So yeah, the moment when I won and the first person I saw was him was just great. You know, it's absolutely a thrill.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. We can't thank you enough for this. We wish you all the best during this award season. And to all of our viewers, please like this video, smash that subscribe button, and don't forget to go to goldderby.com and use the Gold Derby app to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the top prognosticators in Hollywood. Thanks so much, Stephen.
Thank you very much.